Hello and welcome to Working in the Capital. I'm your host, Susan Haywood. On tonight's show, we're going to be discussing the opportunities and challenges of a diverse workforce. I have with me tonight two guests. Kelly McGahey is the Manager of Stakeholder Relations at Hire Immigrants Ottawa, and she'll be joining me later in the show. But first, I'm joined by Dr. Linda Manning, who is an intercultural economist, speaker, educator, and senior fellow at the University of Ottawa. Hi, Linda. How are you?
Hi, Sue.
Welcome for joining us.
Thank you.
So why is this such an issue in terms of having, a diverse workforce in Ottawa?
Well, I think that the number one reason is that there's such a scarcity of skills. Even though we're in a recession right now and most people don't quite understand that there's a scarcity, there continues to be one. And as we come out of the recession, that will become even more costly for everybody. At the same time, employers don't really understand how to tap into some of the other pools of talent that are available.
Right.
And even if they hire them, they don't understand how to keep them and to train them, how to advance them and make sure they're part of tomorrow's leadership.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. I was looking at the 2012 census data for Ottawa, and 30% of our population is under 24, and 30% of our population is over 60. So that actually means 60% of our population is not that prime working age, where most of the talent is actually found and exported. So where does a company begin? Do they start with a diversity policy, or?
Well, the words diversity policy can create some issues because diversity policy is often seen as kind of a quota system that we need to hire people who are different and maybe even push aside Canadians who are qualified for the job.
Right.
So when I think of diversity policies or those kinds of policies, I think of inclusion. I think of making sure that managers are ready and have the incentive to capitalize on all of the talents and abilities that people in the organization have, regardless of where they come from.
Right.
So there are kind of two things that I like to think about in terms of how to move forward on diversity policies.
Okay.
One is that the manager has to have the incentive to be inclusive.
Right.
Because managers have learned a certain set of behaviors and skills and ways that they do things, and they've been rewarded handsomely for doing things that way, the old way, the way that it used to work. That doesn't work anymore. And so they need incentives, that they need to be rewarded, make sure that their promotions, that their advancements, that their raises need to be dependent on how inclusive they are. The second thing is that every organization needs to make sure that they are focusing on fostering networks within the organization.
Right.
When people can work together on common projects, common goals, it turns out that a lot of the barriers that we see in the workplace around difference disappear.
Right.
And people are more productive.
Okay. Working in the Capital is a call-in show, so if you have a question, please call us at 613-728-1001. I find it really interesting. The more I look at this issue, Linda, it sounds to me so much like a few decades ago when women were getting more involved in the workplace. And we heard all sorts of things about, well, maybe it's not good to allow women into all jobs, and policies will need to be redone and practices will need to be redone, and it's really costly and negative impact on the employer. And of course, over time, we've actually seen that that's not true, and the policy adaptations that were made to allow women to be more successful in the workforce were actually better for everyone in the workforce. Do you see it as being the same sort of thing with newcomers?
It's exactly the same thing.
Right.
And I think one of the things that we need to remember is that those policies that were implemented for women, so supposedly to adapt to women in the workplace,
right,
were policies that still maintained and protected the objectives and values and goals of the organization. They in no way subjugated those, put them down in any fashion. And they all turned out to be objectives or policies that helped everybody.
right.
In fact, flex time, for instance, I've heard that is used more by men than by women.
Well, and we can look at a very simple example, getting a little off topic, but the idea of maternity and parental leave was very much considered a woman's issue at first, and it certainly benefited all parents, regardless of gender.
It's interesting too, because what I find is that I've done some research on this
Right.
and worked on this a little bit, and what I found is that when an organization, when a manager changes some practices and policies in the organization that are initially intended to help an immigrant do better in the workplace, and then turns out to help everybody. At the same time, the organization itself starts to shift, starts to change the way that they think about everything.
Right.
So it actually is kind of transformational process that happens when a good manager, when a good organization can be inclusive.
Great. So, how does, I guess, an employer first go about this? You're going to have people apply online, talking about either their international experience, or, oftentimes employers even find that people can't get through their selection systems.
That's right. And what we found, and what has been documented many, many times, is, again, it's just a matter of a system that was working well because it was designed for a specific group of people.
Right.
Doesn't necessarily work as well. So for instance, one of my favorite stories is about an organization that overlooked a very, very competent, very qualified individual, because the way that the system worked, when applications came in, the first thing that the person looking at these, the filter, did was look at the name and the education.
Okay.
What university they graduated from. And as it happened, when somebody has a foreign sounding name, when it's a hard to pronounce name, we have unconscious bias, all of us do, and they often get kicked out of the system immediately. Or if it's a school that nobody's heard of, they don't understand that it's a top school in India or a top school in China, and that this person happened to be at the top of the top of the school, and so they're automatically dismissed. And one person actually pursued this a little bit, contacted the CEO, the president, the owner of the company, and said, "Why was my case dismissed? Because I am very qualified." And when the owner did look at this, they said, "Oh my God, why was this person overlooked? We need this person in our organization." And they changed the way that they did that. They made sure the names and the schools were lower on the list of things that people looked at when the application first came in. Which all that did was made sure that if the person has qualifications and attributes that you want, you're looking at those first. And you're interested in the person before you ever see what their name or where they graduated from. Another thing is that a lot of the online applications systems are designed to catch keywords.
Right.
And if you come from another culture, you have no idea what those keywords are, so you don't put them in.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great point. I've been very fortunate to work for a lot of Canadian and American companies that operate on both sides of the border. And the selection processes, even something as simple as the differences between Canadians and Americans, there are questions you can ask, and the way you frame things where a Canadian will not do well or an American will not do well, let alone the differences between a Canadian and, as you said, someone from India.
Right. Well, I'm American born, so I understand those differences really well, and that's very, very true. The way that the things that you can be asked here are very different than the things you can be asked.
The keywords you would use even very different.
Oh, absolutely, very different. Buzzwords, acronyms, all those things are quite different.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So, do you have some basic advice for employers who are putting together a selection system or reviewing a selection system about how to take some of the bias out?
Well, I think that the first thing to do is to recognize that this comes from the work that I've developed.
Right.
There are three things you have to realize. One is that whatever it is that you're expecting, whatever it is that you're looking for, it comes from a set of behavioral norms that's been defined by your culture.
Right.
Okay. So in Canada, we were just talking about this in Canada, the US, and India. In Canada, we do things a certain way. Okay. Everybody knows that's the way we do things. That's the way we expect other people to do things.
Right.
Well, it turns out that if someone comes from a different culture, they have a different set of ways of doing things, and they have a different set of expectations. And that clash often happens, and the problem is that neither one of the two parties is thinking, oh, this person is just operating under a different set of rules and cultural norms than I am. They're assuming things about that behavior or what they're doing or the way that they're answering questions in a negative way, because they're looking through a particular lens to look at that. So employers need to start thinking that way. They need to understand that the expectations that they have are defined by their culture, and that somebody coming in needs help understanding what their culture is, because they can't see it.
Right. And I think that's a great point, because oftentimes it does come down to a misunderstanding. It's not intentional bias that's built into the system.
That's right.
There's not an intention to exclude applicants from other countries.
That's right.
It's just that the system itself is so structured towards a Canadian.
And it's not structured toward a Canadian to be biased.
No.
It's just, that's the way it is. It's the way it's always been done.
Seems normal.
And it's just that there's a distinct change that's going on in the talent pools and the workplaces of today.
Absolutely. So how can recruiters revamp their practices to hire more internationally educated professionals? You did mention, not looking at names and which school. Any other suggestions?
Well, I think one of the things that employers need to do is to go where this new talent pool is.
Okay.
They know where to go. They've got again, ways of doing things. They've got ways of finding people who will apply for their positions. Well, the people that they're looking for aren't in those pools anymore, so they need to go to the pools where those people are. The interesting thing I find is that employers today are not left on their own to do this. It's quite remarkable. The government, the service providing organizations, and all other groups in the area are working on making sure that the talent pool that's available, these highly qualified, educated, experienced immigrant employees, have gone through several filters: language filters, credential filters, and job readiness filters.
Right.
And they are making available events and all kinds of access to those people for employers. So employers with this new talent pool in this area, in Ottawa, in the Ottawa region, don't even have to do a lot of the work that they would have to do to recruit Canadians. But they don't go to those events.
Right.
And there are events like, as you know, Hire Immigrants. Ottawa does a significant amount of work. The Ottawa Chamber of Commerce Global Work Experience Program, Ottawa Chinese Community Service Center, and Lassie World Skills. They all do all of these, all of this work for employers. So I recommend go where this new talent pool is and recruit them there.
Absolutely. Listening to you describe that, it sounds a little bit like trying to win a fishing competition by standing at the end of a dock when someone has the fish finder telling you where the large fish are, and you've got your line in the wrong spot.
Yeah, and people need to understand, employers need to understand that this talent pool, we make it sound like it's so huge, but it's just as scarce in its own way as the Canadian talent pool is, because the Canadian talent pool, when they're here, tend to stay here, as we've heard in the news. People don't want to move, right? Well, these people, these immigrants who've come to Canada, have already moved. Absolutely. And many of them are moving right back out of Canada because it's not the place for them if they can't find employment. So they've got other countries that are standing there with their fishing rods in the right place.
Right.
So we're competing on a global scale here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Call us with your questions at 613-728-1001, and we'll be right back with more on Working in the Capital. Welcome back to Working in the Capital. I'm joined by Dr. Linda Manning, founder of Leadership Mosaic, Inc. So Linda, before the break, we were talking about Canada not being the only country that's out there looking to, acquire this talent that's held in newcomers.
That's right.
And I think it's even interesting within Canada some of the differences. I know I've read a lot of the research about what the government of Saskatchewan has done to bring newcomers to Saskatchewan versus Ontario, or really it's been Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver where traditionally new immigrants have migrated to. What I found so interesting though is when I've been working abroad, the number of people that say, "Oh, you're from Canada? Are you from Saskatchewan?" And it's not a question you've ever heard before, but it's because these people are looking to come to Canada, and when they do the research, they realize, what a friendly place Saskatchewan is versus, some of the other challenges of coming to other cities. Understanding that, that's not something that we can control, what are some factors that employers can do that make their company a little bit more friendly to apply to?
Well, I think some of the things that I've already said relate quite a bit here.
Right.
If you're going out to where the talent pool is, finding out where people hang out, where they socialize, where they spend their time, getting to know what they do, what their interests are.
Yeah.
Isn't it just like any other relationship or friendship that you want to form? You treat it the same way.
Well, I think that's